I was doing some keyword research the other day and noticed that there are 6 or 7 million of you searching on this keyword death. And that was of interest to me because I've been exploring the subject of death for quite some time. I was a Buddhist monk for many years, and I suppose the theme of death was central to the reasons why I became a Buddhist monk, to explore and discover how I could make sense of it in my life. And so I thought I'd share what I could from my experience with you. Death is a spectre that's really not particularly pleasant. It's not something we really want to be associated with as an idea. It has this connotation of annihilation, connotation of sort of an eternal blackness and an absence of all that we know and love. And so who wants to be associated with that? Nobody does. It's kind of disgusting and terrifying and a fearful prospect. Unfortunately, we live in a culture that really has this attitude towards death, so we just push it aside as something that perhaps we'll deal with when it comes. But right now I've got serious things to deal with, like my actual life. That's much more of interest to me. My life, my family, job, my friends, and the adventures that I can have. So we think death perhaps is inescapable, but look, I'll deal with it when it comes, and right now I'm going to make the most of what I have. Life. Let's assert that and forget this horrible thing that's on the horizon. I suppose religion has been the traditional way people have dealt with their anxieties. But I'm interested in the idea of religion in the true sense of the word. If we look at the etymology and go back to the Latin and consider the word religio, which means to bind back, that suggests there's a reality, there's a truth that we become separated from, that we're no longer in touch with, that we need to reconnect with. And that, to me, is the true sense of what the religious journey is about, and this is the journey that interests me, and this is the journey I wish to talk about, not just in this talk, but in everything that is to follow. So how can we then deal with the issue of death in a real way? It doesn't sound like a particularly hopeful prospect, does it? But I wish to emphasize the fact that it's very present, very current, very real in your life right now, and it's influencing your life right now in a negative manner, until such time as we've understood with insight how to integrate the relevance of this question into our moment-to-moment living. And it is a moment-to-moment process, because if we change the word death to impermanence, then we can say, well, impermanent is happening right here, right now. There's a rising and passing away. There's the rising, passing away of your thoughts, and there's the rising, passing away of your feelings, and there's the rising and passing away of your physical, chemical reactions in your cells. And it goes on, and particle physics, there's recognition that everything's in a constant state of flux, a constant state of movement. Even things that are apparently solid are not in fact solid when you look at them at a molecular level. So we're faced with the fact of impermanence anyway. We can't escape it. It's not only a source of confusion in terms of the prospect of our physical death in the future, it's actually a source of confusion right now. It's influencing your life right now, because we live in the presence of impermanence every second. Impermanence is a law of nature, and it's an intrinsic law. It's an immutable law. So the question to ask then is, if this is a fact, and it is a given fact of life, what effect is it actually having on my life right now? What influence is it having on my life right now that isn't good, that I could perhaps overcome if I were to turn towards it and understand it? I would suggest that the effect that it has is that it serves as a constant source of dis-ease in your life. That's evidenced by the constant thinking and drivenness that we have to reach a point where we finally feel secure. Everything that we do, really, if you reflect upon it, probably has more or less got an aspiration to find security, to find stability, to find warmth, to find freedom. So security, stability, freedom, warmth, connectedness, these are all the sort of things that we aspire to, and we look for them in our own particular ways, whether it be through fame or fortune, through having a beautiful house or creating a beautiful family. All of those things are well and good, but in the face of impermanence, they don't actually square the circle or fulfill the need that we all have to become free from this underlying dis-ease, this underlying searching that drives us from moment to moment. So impermanence then becomes a constant driver of distraction in our lives. And that continuous process of distraction has tremendously destructive consequences, not just in our personal lives and family lives, but for the planet as a whole. So don't just take my word for it. Set aside 20 minutes to be by yourself without distraction, just sitting in a chair, and see for yourself whether the presence of impermanence is an influence that impacts your ability to truly settle and be at ease. Now is the time for us to try and turn towards the fact of impermanence that is so real in our lives, and find out if what the Buddha was pointing to is true, to find out whether in fact there's a hidden gem, a hidden gift at the heart of impermanence. So to put it simply, the presence of impermanence serves as a source of dis-ease and confusion right here, right now. But an image that's often used is that really it's very much like a rope in the grass. When we see it from a distance, we can mistake it for a snake that gives rise to a feeling of fear. Suddenly when we get much closer to that appearance of a snake, we recognize that actually, it wasn't a snake, it's only a rope lying in the grass. It's not something to be afraid of. So wouldn't it be amazing, wouldn't it be a wonder if the story was applicable to our whole idea of death and dying? What if our idea of death and dying is completely upside down? What if our idea of death and dying is completely wrong, and our impression of it is based on ignorance and based on a misunderstanding, based on a misapprehension? What if we're actually simply seeing a snake in the grass that is in fact really only a rope, that is something benign? Because then we could even diffuse the fear and stress the presence of impermanence causes us right now. That's giving us ants in our pants. That would mean the presence of impermanence in both the immediate and longer term, far from being a cause of dread, would become a source of awakening. And this awakening is actually a birthright, because the seed of awakening sits hardwired in the core of your being. Instead of being the spectre that reminds us of our mortality and our death, and is a source of confusion for us in the here and now, becomes a razor's edge that opens us up to a source of unconditional vitality. It's like the 100-foot pole that they speak of in Zen, that we leap off in faith, in recognition of the fact that to leap is to be free, to leap is to be safe, to leap is to enjoy our true home. And the thing that represents a source of confusion becomes a source of clarity. And the thing that represents a source of dread becomes a source of hope. The thing that we associate with the dark and with the black becomes a source of light. The thing that we associate with constant, exhausting movement that never ceases becomes a source of serenity. The impermanence that represents a source of fear becomes a source of security. Impermanence as a representative of the idea of death and dying and all that we associate with it becomes actually a source of eternal life. Every living being, in fact, that lives has this seed potential within it, and this seed really needs to be cultivated so that it flourishes. And if the seed does flourish and blossom and grow in your life, then the whole issue of death is radically transformed, and it could be that the final moment of physical life when the body passes away is actually the culmination, the fulfillment, the perfection of the journey you've been on. I can't claim to have reached that stage, but I do feel that that makes sense to me just based on what I've discovered thus far. So we do have a choice in which we can turn the idea of death around into a positive. As a student of life, we find the courage to become a student of death by locating its presence in the momentary processes of arising and passing away, right here, right now. And in so doing, we discover a new experience of serenity and compassion and wisdom. We discover new depths that were previously inaccessible to us. So death is a paradox. It's a box of hidden gifts. Gifts of unconditional aliveness that we are rewarded with as a result of making the effort to turn and take on board the lesson that reality is trying to teach us. It simply means we're still at the stage of being a student, and we have not yet mastered our lives. But the invitation is there, and this, I believe, is what the whole idea of death is about. So I'm not actually interested in religious conversion, ideology, doctrine, philosophy of life. This is not really what concerns me at all. I'm much more concerned about the practicalities of awakening and equipping you with the tools that will enable you to discover for yourself through direct intuitive insight what's a virtue, what's true, what makes sense. And really all I do is present questions, riddles, that encourage you to look and see, and until such time as you can say, yes, I see for myself this is true. So coming into alignment with this truth of impermanence then becomes a real source of clarity and centeredness in life. It enables us to really cut through with confidence the maze of complexity that gets thrown at us, and to make sense of it by virtue of this awakened inner eye of wisdom. And one of the most liberating things then that comes about as a result of knowing this for yourself is what the Buddha described as becoming independent in the teacher's dispensation. You'll become free from the need to give your power away to any sort of authority. You'll be no longer under the impression that there's somebody out there that has a piece of critical information that you need. There's somebody more clever than you or more intelligent than you. Well, that actually is very much the case. I've no doubt there are many more people that are more intelligent than me, but the basic instinctual connectivity to my existence that allows me to, plugs me into experience of awakening, that is not dependent or reliant upon being super smart. So you won't need a Stephen Fry or a Richard Dawkins or the Dalai Lama or the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Pope to be guides necessarily in your life. Doesn't mean to say you won't have a respectful relationship towards them. You may well do. But you'll also have your own center of power, your own core, your own inner authority. And this is really the thing that's of most interest to me, and I feel is probably of most value to you. So everything I've said thus far is only really an introduction and a pointing to the possibility that the whole issue of old age, sickness and death, your mortality, the fact of impermanence and the confusion that all of that causes can, when understood with skill, become a source of awakening, become a source of enlightenment, and become a source of true fulfillment in your life, whereby you feel you've actually realized your fullest potential. But it is a learning process, and there's practices required, and there's tools that you need to pick up and learn to use and experiment with, so you become adept at deploying your wisdom faculty. Because wisdom, in truth, is about being able to meet the difficulties and problems and obstructions that arise inevitably in all of our lives from this perspective of awareness, this perspective of knowing that arises naturally, spontaneously, as a result of being in touch with this very moment of arising and passing away, this very moment of impermanence. I'm open to you leaving me questions. You can email me questions. There's an email address in the description, and if there's an expression of interest, I will try and leave some video responses, because there are many more things to be said on the topic, and the whole process of listening again and again and again contributes to the training and the activating, the catalyzing, the igniting of the awakening process. So hopefully we'll meet again and continue to explore this whole question of the meaning of life. And the answer, unfortunately, is not 42. I wish it was that simple, but it isn't. And while it isn't 42, the experience of finding the answer brings a lot more joy than any Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I can assure you